Terence said after a moment. Fine, Frank said. He climbed into the cart. Let's finish the 17. Terence climbed in. He drove. He did not ask anything further, which Frank found in that moment to be the most professional thing he had done since arriving at Cowan House Country Club. He called her before he'd cleared the Cowan House car park. The phone rang twice, and she picked up and said his name the way she sometimes did. Not as a greeting, but as a reading, the way you read weather before you step outside. Frank, I need to stay at Kili's. Silence. Everest did not, as a rule, waste energy on surprises she had already anticipated. Just silence, which had its own grammar. Okay, she said. Don't. He stopped, merged onto the boulevard. The desert evening was coming in hard and copper-colored, the sun sitting low and enormous over the western ridgeline. I can't explain it right now. I just need to not be in that house. I'm not saying anything. You're saying a lot. I'm saying okay. Everest. Frank. And there it was. The almost laugh in it. The warmth underneath the edge. She breathed out. I'll call Kili when we're done. She'll say yes. Don't worry about the logistics. Thank you. A pause. He merged into the right lane, and the city opened up around him. Henderson in its evening mode. Strip malls going gold. Sprinklers activating on cue across the residential lawns. Everything performing the ritual of cool it had not quite earned. Something about being close to certain things, she said, and her voice had changed register, moved into that mode he knew. The slow, sure current of her when an idea had been building all day and had finally found its mouth. Something about proximity, how it reaches inside you and decides what you release. You don't choose it, Frank. The choosing is an illusion. You arrive somewhere and the somewhere finds what's already in you. And what's in you rearranges around it like water, like your water. It doesn't bring anything foreign. It just finds the lowest available point. Don't be hard on them, he said. It came out quieter than he intended. I'm not being hard on them. You are this, all of this, your philosophy. It's aimed at my family, and I need you to know they made me who I am. She was quiet for a moment. Yes, she said, they did. He waited for the but. It didn't arrive immediately. She let the agreement sit. Let it be real before she moved through it. They made you generous, she said. They made you patient. They made you someone who will hold his tongue at a dinner table for the sake of peace and fix things quietly rather than announce them. That man, the one I watched walk across a seminar room in a building in Fresno with mud on his boots and a paper on subsurface drip systems. That man is theirs. I have always known that. I have never argued it. Then, but we made someone else, she said. You and I. 9 years of a shared life makes a person, Frank. We argued each other into better shapes. I moved your edges and you moved mine. And somewhere in the middle of all that friction, we became singular. One thing that used to be two. And that version of you, the one that carries me in him, the one that knows what I take in my coffee and why I cry at certain songs and what it means when I go quiet. Her voice stayed even but tightened, like wire taking weight. That version didn't exist. before me, and your family doesn't want him. They want the one they built, and they are not entirely wrong to want him back. But that man walked into the desert and married me, and he is not available for return. Frank drove. The road ran straight ahead of him, the way Nevada roads ran, without apology, without deviation. The desert flat on either side. The mountains holding their positions at the edge of everything, like patient witnesses. That's not what they're doing, he said. Isn't it? They are just. He stopped, felt the sentence fail him somewhere in the middle, started again. They are just who they are. Yes, she said, and so am I, and so are you. And we chose each other across a very large distance, and the distance is making that choice very expensive. She paused. Love is strong, Frank. I believe that. I believe us. But love is also permeable. It can be got at. And in the absence of the body you rely on, the soul finds things to hold. Sometimes it finds the right things. Sometimes it finds what's available. And what's available for you right now, every morning, every evening, every dinner, is a version of yourself that existed before I did. Are you telling me you don't trust me? I'm telling you I don't trust distance. A beat. I don't trust what a kitchen table does to a person over months. I don't trust what temporary looks like once it becomes routine. I don't trust. Her voice broke once, briefly, and reformed. I don't trust going to sleep without you and calling it fine. He pulled to a stop at a red light. sat in the stationary car in the copper evening, with his hands on the wheel and her voice in the air around him. "Go to Kili's," she said. Then softer, "Come home faster." "I'm trying," he said. "I know you are." A pause. "That's what scares me, that you're trying. You shouldn't have to try to be yourself." The light went green. He drove. "I love you," he said. The simplest available truth. "I love you," she said. "Don't let them have you back." The bag hadn't been unpacked. He hadn't planned it that way. Or perhaps some part of him had. The part that keeps its coat on in a room it isn't sure about. 3 weeks in the Band-Aid room, and the duffel still sat against the wall, with the particular posture of something that had been set down temporarily, and knew it. He lifted it onto his shoulder, and the weight of it felt tonight like honesty. He could hear his mother in the kitchen, the specific percussion of her. A pot shifted, a drawer opened and shut, the low channel of her voice moving through the house, the way water moves through a system it has always occupied. Frank stood at the top of the stairs and listened for a moment. Then he heard a second voice. Kristen. He came downstairs. His mother had her back to the room, attending to the stove with the full body commitment she brought to cooking, talking over her shoulder to Kristen, who sat at the kitchen table with a glass of water and an expression that was still in the process of being composed when she looked up and saw him. She saw the bag first, then his face, then the bag again. The expression she'd been composing dissolved. Something heavier replaced it. A visible, unguarded grief. that moved across her features with a slowness that made it worse. The way things that are truly felt move slowly. She didn't speak. She looked at him, and the looking contained everything she wasn't going to say in this kitchen with this family. Frank came to the bottom of the stairs. He kept his voice low. Hey, Chris. She opened her mouth, closed it, managed something small and not quite audible. She looked away from him toward the table, and Frank looked away from her toward the window, because they both understood, without discussing it, that she was the only person in the house who grasped the full weight of what was happening, and that looking directly at that understanding for too long was something neither of them could afford. He had the sudden, uncomfortable clarity that he was abandoning her, not to anything dangerous, just to the ordinary gravity of this table, this kitchen, this family's particular atmosphere, which was its own kind of abandonment. His mother turned. Frank, sweetheart. She registered the bag with the delay of someone whose mind has decided the information doesn't fit. What's the bag for? I'm going to spend a few nights at Kili's. The kitchen received this. His mother's face moved through several expressions in quick succession, each one giving way to something more structural beneath it. Why on earth would you do that? She said. You have your family here. You have your room. You have the back door. Marcus's voice arriving before him, filling the hall the way it always did. Dale a step behind. Two men coming in from golfing, carrying the loose, sun-slowed ease of an afternoon outdoors. Marcus had his father's jacket over one arm and was mid-sentence about something on the back nine when he cleared the doorway and read the room. Dale read it faster. He looked at his son. He looked at the bag. He looked at the quality of the air in the kitchen, which was the specific quality that precedes weather. And then, without breaking his stride, without a word, he walked past all of it and straight up the stairs. His footsteps were even and unhurried. A door closed softly above them. Marcus set the jacket on the back of a chair. What's going on? Frank is leaving. His mother's voice had acquired the particular texture it got when emotion was being used as architecture. He's going to that girl's house again. What girl? Marcus looked at Frank. Kili? What? Why? I don't owe you an explanation, Frank said. He had the bag strap in his fist, and his voice was level in the way that things are leveled when significant effort is being applied to keeping them so. You don't owe, Marcus started. He's abandoning us. His mother's voice cracked on the word abandoning, and she put a hand on her chest. A gesture Frank had watched her deploy at intervals throughout his life. Sometimes genuinely, sometimes structurally, and he had long since lost the ability to be certain which was which. He came back, and now he's leaving again. Just like before. Just like California. I went to California with my wife, Frank said. The word wife landed like a hand flat on a table. Everest is not just another woman. His voice had changed now. The level quality gone, replaced by something that had been building since the dinner table weeks ago, since the passive pause after her name, since I don't see Everest in the truck, since the relief that crossed his mother's face at Kili's appearance, since every careful, sustained, artfully deniable diminishment of the person he had chosen, was choosing, would continue to choose. She is my wife. I stood in a room and made a promise to a woman in front of people who smiled through it and have been quietly working to undo it ever since. She is the person I come home to. She is the person I call. She is not a phase or a problem or an inconvenience you're managing until I come to my senses. She is my wife. His mother made a sound. Marcus stepped forward. Nobody is saying, "You are." Frank turned on him, and something in his bearing made Marcus's step halt. You are saying it constantly. You're just saying it in the language people use when they want to say something without owning it. You moved Dad to my workplace today. My workplace, Marcus, where I am trying to establish myself, where I have a superintendent already looking for a reason to define me as irrelevant. And you stood there and let him call my colleague just the water boy. And you smiled, because that's what you do. You smile and you arrange and you move people around like pieces on a board you've decided belongs to you. I own my business, Marcus said, his voice dropping. I built something. I'm not moving anyone around. I'm trying to keep this family You love this family, Frank said, the way some people love territory. You want the map to stay the same. Everyone in their position. Everyone where you last left them. His chest was moving. He studied it. But I am not a position on your map. I am a person, and families do not own other people. You can love someone completely and have absolutely no right over who they become or who they love or where they choose to plant themselves. That is not abandonment. That is just a life being lived by a person it belongs to. Frank, his mother's voice was wet now, genuinely. I know, he said, and it came out with a tiredness that was not cruel, but was absolute. I know you're upset, and I'm telling you honestly, right now, tonight, I don't have the capacity to manage that. The kitchen was very still. Then Kristen's hand found his shoulder. Light, just the weight of a hand. Nothing more. But the gesture was complete and unmistakable, and it landed in the room with the quiet, declarative force of someone choosing a side without raising their voice. Marcus looked at her hand. He looked at his wife's face. He looked at his brother. Something moved through Marcus's eyes in that moment. Not quite rage, not quite grief. The thing that lives beneath both of them, where they share a root. It lasted 1 second, maybe less. Frank lifted his bag. He walked to the door. He didn't look back at Kristen, because looking back at her face in that moment was a kindness he didn't have the right to offer. and a wound he didn't have the right to cause. He pulled the door shut behind him. The Nevada night was warm and enormous and utterly indifferent, the way deserts are, the sky salted with stars, the distant lights of the city smudged and glittering, the air carrying the smell of cooling rock and someone's irrigation system running 3 blocks over. Frank walked to his truck. He put the bag on the seat. He drove. He doubted himself on the stairs. That was when it happened. Not in the car. Not when he'd pulled away from his parents' house with the city lights breaking open around him. Not on the 20-minute drive through Henderson's nighttime grid. On the stairs. The second floor landing. The carpet a neutral grey. The corridor lit in the thin amber of economy bulbs. Someone's television audible behind a closed door. He stopped with his bag on his shoulder and stood there and thought, what are you doing here? Not rhetorically, genuinely. He was a grown man, a married man, standing in a stairwell in his wife's twin sister's apartment building because he could not tolerate one more dinner. The sentence, assembled plainly, had a faintly absurd quality. He stood with it for a moment. Then he climbed the last flight. He knocked. The door opened and whatever argument he'd been having with himself on the stairs simply stopped. The apartment behind Kili was warm and particular, lit in amber and low lamplight. Something playing softly from a speaker he couldn't see. The smell of warm flatbread and spiced chicken threading out into the corridor. It reached him before she said a word. This quality the place had, a sanctuary's specific gravity, the atmospheric exhale of a space that had been arranged around peace rather than performance. It pulled him across the threshold the way warmth pulls cold air. Kili was in a loose linen top and bare feet, and she hugged him once, firmly, the hug of someone who has been briefed and has decided that questions are a lesser form of care. I'm making chicken wraps, she said, releasing him. Nearly done. Your room's ready. Second door, next to mine. He looked around the apartment. Kili, you're clearly a fully grown man, she said, already turning back toward the kitchen. You don't need to ask me anything. He stood in the entrance hall a moment longer. Then he put his bag down and found the second door. The room was small and considered. A bed with clean linen in white and sand. A wooden nightstand. A lamp with a warm bulb. The window looked out over a quiet Henderson Street. The distant ridge of the McCullough Range just visible against the dark sky. A black silhouette against a slightly less black night. Frank sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the window for a while. On the way back down the hall, he passed the living room and took it in properly for the first time. Kili's decorating was not the decorating of someone who had read a magazine about decorating. It was the decorating of someone who had lived places. A wooden Malian figurine on the bookshelf, elongated and austere, standing next to a geology text and a dog-eared paperback with Cyrillic on the spine. On the wall, a large textile piece in ochre and indigo that might have been art or might have been ceremonial or might have been both. A ceramic bowl on the coffee table, holding smooth river stones and what appeared to be a dried seed pod the size of a fist. A mobile of copper discs above the kitchen doorway. The kind of thing that belonged in a garden or a temple or an imagination, rotating slightly in the air from the open window. It was the home of a person who brought things back, who found the world genuinely interesting and kept evidence of it. Can I take a shower before we eat? He called toward the kitchen. A pause, then dryly, I'll need to check your credentials first. He smiled. It surprised him, the ease of it, the speed. He went to shower. Afterward, the meal was quiet in the best way. The wraps were good, charred at the edges, full of something she'd seasoned without a recipe. The kind of cooking that suggested confidence rather than effort. They talked about nothing in particular, and the nothing in particular was sufficient. Frank ate and felt the day move away from him in gradual degrees. The way tension leaves a system when you release pressure at the right point. He had not talked much at his family's table in weeks. His silence there had been load-bearing, strategic and exhausting. The silence of a man managing himself carefully in a room that required management. Here, his silence was simply silence. It required nothing. It occupied its own space without apology. Later, in the small room with the lamp still on, he called Everest. How do you feel? She asked. He thought about it honestly. Better, he said. I feel better. She was quiet for a moment. He could hear her smiling. Good, she said. That's good, Frank. The weeks that followed had a different texture. The commute to Cowan House was 20 minutes longer from Kili's side of Henderson, and Frank found, to mild surprise, that he didn't mind. The extra stretch of road in the early morning, the desert just beginning its daily negotiation with the sun, the sky running through its sequence of impossible colors, the city still half asleep and unhurried, felt like something given back to him, a margin, a breath between the ending of one thing and the beginning of another. Work had found its momentum. The northeast quadrant was holding pressure. The lateral lines on the back nine were healed. Terence had stopped holding the pressure gauge like a threat and started holding it like a tool, which was not a small thing. Pruitt orbited at his usual radius, authoritative and watchful, and Frank worked and said little, and let the results speak in the language that mattered, which was the language of water, moving correctly through a system, keeping 300 acres of desert green against the desert's better judgment. He drove back to the third floor in the evenings, and the third floor was always the same, warm, quiet, lit in amber, Kili's copper mobile turning above the kitchen doorway. He began to talk, not all at once, not in the deliberate, assembled way he talked to Everest, where he was always underneath the talking, making editorial decisions, choosing what would worry her, what would restart the arguments they'd already had, what would confirm fears he didn't want confirmed. With Everest, he talked the way a careful engineer talks about a system, accurately, but with an awareness of the audience. He loved her too well to be entirely unguarded with her. With Kili, he simply talked. He told her about Marcus at the clubhouse, about Pruitt and the water, and the arms perpetually folded, the way a man could build a moat out of nothing but posture. He told her about the dinner table and the jokes shaped like observations, and the relief, the naked, unguarded relief On his mother's face the night Kili herself had walked through the door instead of Everest. Kili listened the way she did everything, without urgency, without filing silences before they'd finished being silences. She didn't tell him what it meant. She didn't build a philosophical architecture around it and invite him to walk through it and find himself changed on the other side. She just listened and occasionally said, "That's awful," or "Your brother is a piece of work," or "What did Terence do?" at the right moments. And it was uncomplicated, nourishing in the way that uncomplicated things are nourishing. He found he slept better. They cooked together on evenings when the timing aligned. When Frank was back before 7 and Kili had come in from the laboratory, still in her mind, which she always was, the focused residue of whatever she had been examining, still visible in the slight delay of her responses, as though she was answering from two places at once. She was a geologist by training and a sedimentologist by disposition, which Frank understood as the study of what things leave behind when they move. She'd explained it once over a chopping board, and he'd thought about the aquifers for the rest of the evening. She cooked with a scientific precision that occasionally crossed into the experimental. One evening, she produced a lamb stew with the preserved lemon and fennel seed that Frank ate 2 bowls of and said nothing for 10 minutes after. Another time, she attempted something with butternut and miso that she declared, without ceremony, a failure, and they ate toast for dinner instead. And it was one of the more pleasant meals Frank could remember. He learned things. He learned that she kept her phone face down always, that she had read Moby Dick 4 times and considered it primarily a book about obsession disguising itself as purpose, that she made tea in the morning with the focused ritual of a person who considers the first hour of the day sacred and guarded it accordingly, that she could be in a room with noise and be completely absent from it, not rudely, not performatively, just genuinely elsewhere, following some interior current that she would surface from without drama and re-enter the conversation at the precise point she'd left. She laughed rarely, but when she did, it was total. A laugh that committed fully and briefly and left the air lighter. He learned that she collected stones, not precious ones, not the curated, purchased kind. Stones she'd found on field work, on beaches, on an apparently unremarkable pavement in Marrakech, that had nonetheless produced a piece of sandstone she kept on the bathroom shelf. Each one had a location and a reason, and she could produce both without hesitation if asked. The bathroom shelf held 5 of them, graduated in size, in sand and rust, and one the deep arterial red of the Nevada rock at sunset. He found he looked at her face now without the adjustment. That had changed slowly, the way light changes, not an event, just the gradual revision. The architecture of her features, so precisely Everest, and yet so entirely not, had stopped being an equation he needed to solve. She was becoming herself to him, which sounds simple and is not simple at all. She was becoming a person he knew, rather than a reflection of a person he loved. There were still moments, a certain angle in the kitchen light, a gesture, the way she tilted her head when she was considering something, a quality in the voice on the rare occasions when she was tired. In those moments, Frank found somewhere else to look until the moment passed. But they were becoming fewer. One evening, they were both reaching for the olive oil at the same moment, and her hand arrived first, and she passed it to him without looking up from the pan she was monitoring. And he took it, and it was nothing. A small domestic nothing, transacted without weight or significance. He thought about it later in the small room with the sand and white linen. The McCullough range, dark against the dark sky. He thought, that's what safety feels like. Not excitement, not the grand, complicated love he carried for Everest, like weather in his chest. Just the undemanding warmth of a person who shares your space without requiring you to perform inside it. The radical simplicity of being somewhere that asks nothing of you except your honest presence. He picked up his phone to call his wife. She picked up on the second ring. Hey you, she said. Hey, he said. Outside, the Henderson night was still and enormous. The copper mobile turned above the kitchen doorway. Frank lay back against the pillow and talked to his wife, and meant every word, and did not examine too closely the particular piece of the room he was saying them from. Pruitt had begun arriving earlier. Frank noticed it the third week. The superintendent's truck in the maintenance yard before 6. The lights on in the office that had previously been dark when Frank arrived. It was the behavior of a man repositioning, which meant a man who felt his position threatened, which meant something had shifted in the geology of Cowan House's internal politics, and Pruitt was aware of it before he was willing to admit it. The lunch with Tom had happened on a Tuesday. Tom Buscemi ran the general manager's office with the efficient, unshowy confidence of someone who had spent years watching other people confuse authority with volume and had drawn the correct conclusions. He'd ordered the fish, asked Frank specific questions about the expansion project on the proposed North course, listened to the answers without interrupting, and at the end said, "I want you in the room when we talk to the engineers." Just that. Frank had driven back to the maintenance yard afterward and found Pruitt waiting by the cart with his arms folded and his jaw set in the specific configuration it assumed when the world had confirmed a fear he had been working hard to dismiss. "Good lunch," Pruitt had said. "Good lunch," Frank had said. They had not discussed it further. Terence, for his part, had begun to emerge, slowly, the way things emerge from sediment. First an outline, then a shape, then something you could name. He told Frank, across 2 weeks of incremental disclosure, that he was the first in his family to finish a 4-year degree, that his father ran a landscaping company in North Las Vegas and had expected him to join it, that he had chosen environmental science as an act of private revolution, that he wasn't sure his father had registered as revolutionary. He told Frank these things in pieces, in the spaces between tasks, and then returned to work as though nothing had been said, which Frank understood as the grammar of a man still learning that the things he carried were worth saying aloud. Frank listened. He had become, he realized, a better listener. He thought about where he'd learned that. The couch had happened gradually. In the first weeks, he'd sat in the armchair, the one by the window with the lamp above it, the one that was clearly Kili's reading chair, but which she had never reclaimed from him, having simply relocated to the couch with the serene adaptability of a person unbothered by change. Then, one evening, there was a plate involved, and the armchair had no surface beside it, and Frank had moved to the other end of the couch without ceremony, and that had been the end of the armchair arrangement. They had found a show about competitive ceramics that neither of them could fully explain their investment in. They watched it with the specific, slightly abashed commitment of people who have discovered a shared weakness. Kili narrated her predictions under her breath. Frank disputed them. She was usually right, which she did not make a point of, but did not pretend otherwise. On a Thursday evening in the 7th week, a contestant attempted a technically ambitious vase, and Kili said, without looking up from her tea, "That's going to crack." And it cracked, and Frank said, "How?" And she said, "Stress distribution." And they looked at each other with the satisfaction of two people who have, without designing it, built a small and private world. He remembered it during the adverts. "Hold on," he said. "I'll be right back." He went down the hall to his room. The room where the bag now lived open on the chair, where his boots were under the bed, where his irrigation notes covered the nightstand, and his spare work shirts hung on the hook behind the door. The room that had ceased, at some point without announcement, to feel temporary. He returned with his fist closed. Kili looked at it, then at him. One eyebrow lifted with the precise degree of inquiry she applied to things that interested her. "What's that?" "Close your eyes,"